Well, my name is Hector. I'm the head of the corporate department in Spain. And firstly, thank you for taking the time to join the session tonight. And the presentation is obvious: how to open a company, not in Europe, but not in a European company, but how to open a company in one of the jurisdictions where we work in Europe. And a few months ago, we came up with the idea just to provide a presentation with the different advantages and disadvantages on how to open up a company in Europe, depending on the jurisdiction, right? Because sometimes I get a lot of questions, a lot of clients who they're asking how I want to set up a company in Spain, but they don't actually, or in Europe, but they don't know exactly that there are different jurisdictions, and every jurisdiction has different regulations and taxation tax rates applicable. So we decided to just explain very briefly and very focus on how to set up a company and the applicable regulations in Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Cyprus. So because I've been working for Lexidy for the last 5 years, and I'm very aware of how much of a daunting task can be to set up a company and a business. And if you're talking about a different country, a different jurisdiction, and a different language, then the difficulty rises up to a point where help might come in handy. And that's why I always advise to get the right legal assistant advisor by your side, so you can get tailored advice to your business and your needs. Right. So the first question you get in Europe, basically, most of the jurisdictions, they are trying to get to a uniform regulation. So basically the main steps to set up a company either in Greece, in Spain, Portugal, or Italy are as 6. So we want to define them. We want to summarize them as 6. So the first step: what's a legal form you like to go for? Is it a limited liability company that is a sociedad limitada, or is it an EPE in Greece, or is it a public entity in Portugal? What are the requirements? Because the requirements might vary. Also, the share capital deposit that for a limited liability company in Spain, you may need to deposit 3,000 euros, but for a public entity in Portugal, you have to deposit 50,000 euros. You need to be very aware of what legal entity you're going after, and what are the aims that you're pursuing. Then the second step is to obtain a unique corporate name from the commercial registry, and that is a tricky one, because a lot of times, sometimes, our clients think that by obtaining that name, they get the right to that trademark, and that's a different process that I'm happy to explain you later on. But a name from the mercantile registry or the company's house for Spain or Portugal or Cyprus, it's just a trading name, but it doesn't grant you any right to a trademark. The third step usually is to get a tax identification number for shareholders. That most of the foreign shareholders, they never trade in the country. So you need an NIF number for Spain and Portugal, AFM for Greece, o la partita IVA for Italy. Then the fourth step in Italy and Spain is to go to the notary public and to sign the establishment deed. But in Cyprus, Greece, and Portugal, you can the solicitor can take over of that process and you can file directly the documents with the company registry. And then the rest is just a very straightforward process. You obtain the social security number and you register the employees. The last step, opening a bank account, it might be tricky, but if you are with the right lawyers by your side, you might get the bank account open in less than 2 days. Now, the question, where to? So obviously, I have to start by my own country, Spain, that I believe it barely needs an explanation. It's got a strategic location between Europe and Africa. You've got highly educated, skilled workforce, and then there is a new jurisdiction and a new regulation, the startup regulation, that is quite inclined to new startups. And if you meet the exact requirements, you might benefit from the reduced corporate tax rate at 15%. Now, Portugal, there you go, low labor costs. Then it's quite a business-friendly environment with streamlined procedures. The lawyers there, that is amazing. They can, our lawyers there, they can sign the establishment deed for you. You can file, you can basically incorporate a company totally remotely. Sometimes you may need to come just for one day to open the bank account, but other than that, with €1, you can get the company off the ground. And in Italy, obviously, that's another country that needs very little introduction. The rich cultural heritage, the incentive tax advantages for young entrepreneurs, and they also have a new regulation that they want to pass on startups that hopefully will help new startups to get off the ground. Now, Greece, again, you get very high skilled employees for quite a low labor cost. So the minimum salary, as you can see there, is 1,176 euros, and then the minimum salary is 780. Now, the strategic location for international trade is clear. You get access to the Mediterranean and the Middle Eastern markets. And again, for €1, you Jan, I can see that you raise your hand.
Yeah, sorry, because if you can allow people that it's outside waiting, I don't know if you have access.
Okay.
But just a moment, thank you.
No, that's fine. Well, sorry for all of you joining now. I just realized I had to unmute you all. And I'm sorry for the ones that were already listening, but is there a way, Jan, that they all get unmuted without me having to unmute them all?
Yeah, I was looking at that, but I think you have to do it before the meeting. But what we can do is maybe go a little bit back, or go ahead and they will see the recording later.
Okay, then let's go ahead, because so just for the ones who just joined, I basically gave a brief explanation on why we're coming up with this seminar, and it's just to offer an overview on the different jurisdictions we work for, and we work in Greece, Cyprus, Italy, and Spain, and the different advantages and disadvantages on setting up a company there. I'm sorry for all of you who couldn't see it, but luckily for you, I'm recording the meeting, and if you request it later on, I can share it with you. Okay, and if you've got questions that might have not been raised before, you can just ask them during the Q&A at the end of the meeting. And here by my side is Patricia, by the way, that she's the head of the corporate department in Portugal, who's helping me out also with the presentation. So the last jurisdiction we work in is Cyprus, and most of our Cyprus leads, and quite understandably, they're looking for a business friendly environment and a low taxation regime. And here, impossible to be beaten, 12.5% on corporate tax rate. So that's one of the lowest one. And if you meet the requirements to be considered a technology company, it might go down. It may even go down to 2.5, which is quite impressive. Now, the most frequent questions that we get what type of legal entity should I choose for my business? And I'm happy that we get this, because I briefly mentioned it before, but in Spain you get the SL and the SA, and it's most of the legal form all throughout the jurisdictions are very similar. In Italy, you get the Società di Responsabilità Limitata, and then in Greece, the IKE or the limited liability company, the same in Cyprus. Now, what are the common taxes related to business activity? That is one of the most frequent questions that I get. So in Europe, you get corporate tax, VAT, dividends, social security on employees, and then depending on the country, for instance, in Spain, if your revenue goes over 1 million euros, you get the tax on the activity. But basically, it's the corporate tax that it might vary from Spain. That is, the corporate tax rate is 25%. To Cyprus, that is 12.5, or it can go down to 2.5 if you meet some requirements. The VAT is very similar throughout the jurisdictions. It's around 20%, 21% in Spain, 24% in Greece, and 23% in Portugal. So it's very similar. Now, for the dividends in Spain, for instance, you can get tax on dividends from 90% to 24%, but in probably the most interesting jurisdiction to go for when you want to cash in dividends it might be Cyprus, because if you meet some requirements that we can explain to you in another meeting, you might qualify to apply for the tax-exempt dividend taxation. And the social security on employees, you need to be very careful what the jurisdiction you go for. In Spain, my clients from the States, from the UK, they get frightened when they hear that the companies have to pay 33% on top of the employee's salary for social security contributions. And how long does it typically take to register a company in each country? I don't know, Patricia, if you want to make a comment on that.
Okay. So regarding how long does it take to register a company, depending on the country and depending on the type of company, of course. And but usually I believe that we are in the wrong slide right now. One back. The timeline depends on the country, but usually takes a few weeks, depending on how long the documents will be made available. For example, as an average, in Spain, the incorporation procedure might take from 2 to 6 weeks. In Portugal, between 2 to 3 weeks. In Portugal, the lawyers are able to certify the signatures and have notary powers. So we don't have to, in Portugal, we don't have to struggle with the appointment before a notary public. That's why the deadline is shorter. In Greece, between 1 and 2 weeks, it's faster. Cyprus, 2 weeks, and Italy as an average of 3 weeks in order to incorporate the company. Of course, this might also depend on the level of choices and the persons involved, but this is the average deadlines for the incorporation. Regarding the type of incorporation and if it's required a physical presence in the country, in Cyprus, yes, it is possible to register the company remotely. In Spain, Portugal, and Greece, we can execute mostly and all the steps of the incorporation procedure remotely without the need to be physically present in the country. However, due to bank account compliances, form signatures, certified signatures with the banks, sometimes the banks required the physical presence of the person in order to conclude the opening of the bank account, depending on the compliance and the level of compliance procedure involved.
Yeah, that is right. In Spain, sometimes, and that's why we're trying to, because our job when it comes to open a bank account is to fight with the bank manager, right? And sometimes we manage to open the bank accounts remotely, and I hope that is the tendency in Europe. But a lot of times, just one day, the bank managers they ask us for the directors of the company to come to the city for one day and just introduce themselves. And I think that's also a good side on our clients, because if they are able to travel for just one day, just to meet to meet ourselves and then to meet also the bank manager, it's also a good sign for our future cooperation.
Yes. And in each case, whenever the banks require the presence here, of course, we can take care of the entire procedure just to make sure that the person comes to Portugal or to Greece or Spain or whatever, just to have the documents signed and that everything is ready.
Exactly. And it was, to me, where it struck me the most is that during the pandemic, we were able to open bank accounts remotely, but for the last 3 or 4 months, it seems that the presence of our clients is required again, which is strange considering that we're going towards a digital world. But we hope that that won't last much longer and that we go back to the same process we had during the pandemic. Sometimes we also get asked whether there are any restrictions on foreign ownership or investment in each country. While to EU nationals, there is no restriction at all. To non-EU nationals, sometimes, and depending on the activity, which is quite rare, there are some restrictions that apply to critical infrastructure or critical technology, like defense technology or essential supplies and sensitive data, but it's not something that you may see on a daily basis. It doesn't really matter where you come from. You can set up a company remotely in Spain, in Greece, or in Italy or in Portugal. And the only thing you need is, as I said before, a tax identification number and a power of attorney. From then on, we can take care of all the process. So Lexidy, what is Lexidy? Lexidy is a law firm that started, it's a legal tech boutique. We've got 4 departments. The corporate department, there is one Patricia and I work for, and then an immigration, a real estate department, and a tax department. And we basically, what we try to do is we've got a customer centric point of view, and the clients are on our the clients is the most important thing on our daily basis. We've been doing 8 years so far, and on my end, I've been doing this for 4 years already. I started in Madrid 4 years ago, and ever since we've seen opening offices in Lisbon, in Porto, Milan, and Athens, and we basically try to simplify our clients' lives, and that's why I wanted to emphasize on the fact that we, from the moment you have the first call with us, we will advise you on where is your most preferred jurisdiction. Where's the most applicable to your case? Because sometimes in Spain, we get a question, we get asked, hey, I want to set up a company here, but I'm not that happy with the corporate tax rate because it's 25%. What can I do? And then my first answer is, hey, look, we also we also work in Cyprus. Are you interested in maybe starting off with a lower tax regime? And then if you see that there is business in Spain, you can move on later on. So that's a value add that I'm happy, I'm proud that we can offer nowadays. And here Federico is our partner that is also here in the meeting. He founded the law boutique in 2015, and ever since, as you can see as I briefly said, the timeline in 2018, Madrid, 19, Lisbon, 21, Athens, and then in 22, Milan and Porto. So I don't know, Patricia, if you want to ask, because I got a few questions before I opened the Q&A session. What is an European company?
Well, an European company is basically a type of company who was created for some time now. It's in force in Europe. It kind of allows the creation amongst the European Union of a company at an European level. So for any kind of existing companies who operate across Europe, they have the opportunity to incorporate European Union company. It ended with the termination SE. That's the same in all the European countries, and now, to avoid confusion, this wording is reserved to define this kind of companies. It comes from the Latin word Societas Europaea. The minimum share capital is 100,020 euros, and the shareholders have to be corporate companies, entities related with European countries. The head office has to be established in Europe, but it kind of gives that company a nature more related with a federal state, like a federation, implementing an European entity which can operate in all European countries. For example, if the one company of this kind has the head office in one European country but wants to relocate to other country, it doesn't have to dissolve the company in the country where the company exists, but it can just transfer the head office to another European entity, to the other European country.
Oh,
so it's a step. It's a large step in terms of implementation. Mm-hmm. It's very common in the countries which incorporate the most. It's Czech Republic and Germany, but I believe it will become a trend.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. Another tricky question, I don't know if you can answer that one. If you have to sell the Portuguese jurisdiction to set up your company there, where would you set up a company in Portugal? What do you think is the most attractive trade when setting up a business there?
Well, Portugal has becoming a trend recently. So I guess the most attractive things about Portugal is, of course, besides what everybody says, the food, the environment, the weather. Portugal, it's a very stable country in terms of politics, safety. Portuguese people are the Portuguese universities are very good. So it's easy to get workforce, quality workforce. Everybody here, it's very easy for any foreign person to get along in Portugal because Portuguese people easily speak other languages. So it's actually a foreign person can move into Portugal and stay here without even having difficulties to learn Portuguese because they will be able to speak in other languages. And it's a perfect nest for entrepreneurship because the Portuguese government, even though they might be able to be criticized in many levels, of course, but they bet on very strong digitalization procedure, trying to make things easier and simpler. And for example, the commercial registered company in Portugal is an electronic document since 2010, no paper involved. It's basically a code that the owners of the company have. And according to the law, giving that code to any public entity, it's the same as giving a certificate. So the owner of the company only has to have the code valid, and that's the official certificate. And that certificate is updated real time. So if something was requested regarding that company from the commercial register today, anyone who has a code can check real time what's going on. Apart from that, I think Portugal is an easy country to get along, to invest. And it has a very privileged relationships with Africa, South America, of course, due to common languages, common relationships, has good airports, ports as well, and it's connected by the sea to those continents. It's a privileged location and a privileged historical background and relationships. So I trust that Portugal is a good country to invest.
Just taking on the point you said before, the fact that you've got a electronic commercial registry, that is amazing because you can get information on your company on live, and that is quite And can you remind me, was the corporate tax rate for Portugal? I think somewhere about 20.
The general corporate tax rate is 21%. There are reduced tax rates in Madeira and the Azores. They are islands, of course. They have the circumstances of being an island. It's more difficult to get there, but in terms of if assets are needed, but there are also lovely places to invest and to live in. But the general tax rate is 21%,
and that's quite good. I'm asking that question because in Europe, for instance, if you have a company set up in Portugal, and then you have another one in Cyprus, and then you see that the Cyprus taxation regime is more favorable to your needs that Portugal. The distribution of dividends among European companies, it's tax exempt. So that's a trade that we also like to offer our clients, just an optimization of the tax services that we can provide. You might have the company in Portugal or in Spain, and then the holding company in Cyprus. But at the end of the day, we can not achieve profits, but you can move the benefit of the company from one jurisdiction to another one that might be more favorable to your case. And now that I mentioned that, I will answer Mac's question. That it was in which jurisdiction is a holding company most beneficial from a tax perspective? Mac, that depends, right? Like everything in life. As I said before, holding companies in Cyprus might benefit from a distribution of dividends on exempt. If you meet some requirements, I believe some of them are that you need to have some personnel there, that you need to have a valid economic motive to have the company there, that you've got some business there. Also, for instance, the tax regime for holding companies in Spain is quite interesting, because if you meet some requirements, the corporate tax rate for holding companies, the name is Empresa de Tenencia de Valores, might be also tax exempt on the corporate tax rate. Going to another question, I see that Tariq asked, what type of remote business is possible in Europe? Well, I said before, we were mentioning that all the jurisdictions, you can set up the company remotely. Just for some of them, your presence might be required for just one day. In Greece and Spain, that seems to be the case. In Portugal, depending on the case, sometimes you might get it. No, but Patricia, correct me if I'm wrong, you might be able to incorporate the company and open the bank accounts without the presence of the client. And in Cyprus, you can set up the company completely remotely. No need for you to come over unless you want to enjoy the beautiful beaches of Cyprus. And that is for you, Patricia. How easy it is to get trained sales force in Portugal, and what is the average salary?
Well, the minimum salary, that is to say the minimum salary that has to be paid for a worker, is 700. Of course, in terms of trained sales force in Portugal, it is, I believe it is easy to get the trained sales force and good workforce. In Portugal, that kind of depends. The average salary in each kind of activity depends on the nature of the activity and how competitive that sector is. But I believe it would be easier, and the average salary is very competitive.
Thank you, Patricia, because you're very lucky today. You've got another question. So Mike is asking, what are the costs involved in setting up a company and your fees?
Well, the administrative fees in order to incorporate a company are not very outstanding. In case there is a shareholder which is a company, a subsidiary company who wants to incorporate a company in Portugal, that entity needs to have a Portuguese taxpayer number, which has the cost of 50 euros. Apart, in case the company wants to apply for a specific name, a new firm to be approved, that it has the cost of 75 euros. And the incorporation itself, the register of the Articles of Association and the conclusion on the register of the Articles of Association, which would allow the company to be formalized and duly registered. It has the cost of 360 euros in case the shareholders intend to use a tailored Articles of Association. However, there are some standard basic clauses for the Articles of Association, which would be recommended in case of more simpler structures. For example, a sole shareholder, limited liability company, given that the Articles of Association are mostly meant to regulate the relationship amongst the shareholders. If there is only one shareholder, we can stand with the simplest Articles of Association. In that case, the registration fees would be 200 euros. So it's not a very outstanding cost to handle.
Okay, thank you. I have here another question. This is for Greece, and luckily we've got here our Greece lawyer, Eleni. Again, what are the costs for setting up a company in Greece?
Hello to all. I'm Eleni from the Greece department, the head of the corporate. I think that we are more attractive than in Portugal because we do not have these exchange costs in order to incorporate a company. So the only cost that involves the whole company structure is only 10 euros if we proceed with incorporation through the electronic profile that the Chamber of Commerce has already used in order to accelerate the whole processes. So this is why we are usually taking around 1 day to 3 business days to incorporate the business. In case we are willing to actually submit the Articles of Association to be tailored, we could make it up to the amount of 80 euros for capital companies, such as limited liability, SA company, and IKE companies, as mentioned. So that is the whole amount of money that you have to invest in order to incorporate the business in Greece, because the obtaining of the Greek tax identification number is totally free, because it is provided by the public authorities, and we do not have any cost to be involved in order to keep the business name to be used for the company as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Eleni. So Patricia, again for you. So what are the costs? What will can they use your office address for the company information?
Of course, we can provide that service to our clients as well. First, it is also a good question, what will be the address of the company if the shareholders or the managers are not resident here? In Portugal, it is not required for the shareholders nor the managers to be resident in Portugal. The person can be the manager of a Portuguese company or a shareholder of a Portuguese company without having any sort of requirements regarding residency in the country. So the person can incorporate a country here, can manage a company in Portugal without any kind of residency requirements, keeping the tax residency in the country where the person lives. Regarding, of course, a Portuguese company needs to have a Portuguese head office, and we can provide that service to our clients, having the company registered office in our office. Whenever there is any mail communications received to the company, we'll get in touch with our client, submitting the communications and explaining its content, because sometimes it's also written in Portuguese. So we'll be able to clarify, translate, and explain its content.
Well, thank you for raising that topic, because we get the same thing all the time. As a shareholder, can I set up a company in Spain or in Greece? It doesn't really matter where you come from. You can set up your company in Spain or in Greece, and you don't need to be resident, and you don't need to have a work permit in Greece. And in Spain, if you've got somewhere on site, or even if you don't have it, you can also set up the company without being resident at all. Okay, let me see if we've got any other questions that I can see.
Should I just respond to Mark, because I saw that he's actually asking about naturalization process in order to incorporate a company and then to gain benefit from it.
Yeah, please.
From Greece's aspects, there is a type of residence permit that allows you to actually come in Greece through the business incorporation by being the shareholder of the company or the director of it or a member of the board of directors. Nevertheless, the new law applicable, and that is starting from January 2024 and on, has limited this kind of access in order to receive the residence permit by putting like a bar the turnover of the company in an annual base that has to be up to the amount of 4 million euros in order to actually maintain the right to renew the residence permit that we have. So by now we have this time period and until the end of the year to just be benefited from this regime. And this is not a process that actually allows us to have naturalization progress through this. We have other type of, if we apply, we have 2 years residence permit that is renewable for another 3 years. And if we make it to 10 years of a continuation residence permit, then we have the right to actually make an application in order to receive the citizenship.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I didn't know that, and that's why an advantage when setting up a company in Greece. Here again, Patricia, I think you said that already, but how long does it take for a company to be set up in Portugal?
Well, for a company to be set up, the procedure, basically we have some steps. If the shareholders and the managers do not hold a Portuguese taxpayer number, that would be our first step. Once the number is issued, we will be able to apply for the firm's approval, the name for the new company, and after that, register the articles of association. So these steps shall be accomplished by order, according to this order that I listed. But as an average, I would say, as we mentioned, between 2 to 3 weeks. But the tax authority, for example, in order to issue the taxpayer numbers for individuals, it usually takes 2-3 days, sometimes a bit longer according to the workload. The approval of the names, it can take up to 10 days, but usually 3 days would be the average deadline. Of course, in case our first round of proposed names, requested names, are not acceptable, we will have the chance to request 3 other options that might take more days, but usually the service time response, it's very reasonable. And for the registration, of course, it can take up to 10 days, but there are cases where the company registration was requested in the morning and issued on the very same day or the morning next day. So I've seen companies being incorporated by commercial registry less than 24 hours, but legally it can take up to 10 days.
Okay, I can see here that someone is asking whether you can get PR by company information. Can you specify what you mean by PR? And in the meantime, I'll be responding another question that is asking me, what are the requirements for qualifying for the lower corporate tax rate in Spain on 15%? So it basically, if you are sold as a shareholder, as an individual or a company, and you have never traded in Spain before or in the last 2 years, and the activity is one of those is qualified as an innovative activity, then you might qualify for the lower tax rate, corporate tax rate that is set at 15%, and not from scratch, but from the moment you start making profit. So I think that in terms of other corporate tax rates in Europe is quite an interesting one, and it puts Spain right at the top of the most interesting tax regimes for corporations in Europe. This is for you, Patricia. Mark is asking whether he can get the permanent resident by setting up a company in Portugal.
Yes, there is a type of visa which is called the D2. It starts with the incorporation of the company, And after the incorporation of the company, the person will have grounds to apply for a residency visa. And obviously we can assist with the obtaining the visa in Portugal, as well as in all the other countries that we've been talking about. We can assist both with the visa procedure as well as the incorporation of the company.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't see we've got more questions, and we're nearly at the end of the session. We've been 45 minutes here. And well, unless you've got any other questions, we can just call it a day. And well, thank you for taking the time to just join the session and listen to how we can best help you. And again, I hope that we can get in contact. I think you all got my meeting link. So if you want to book me in for next week, if you want to send me an email, some of you already sent me an email, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Or if I don't have the answer, then I'll lead you to the right person who will get back to you. Well, thank you also to Patricia and for Lenny to help me out with the queries in their jurisdictions. And yep, I hope to see you all soon.